I first encountered Kevin Anderson on the opening day of 4th grade. My name is Richard White, and thanks to Miss Harris's alphabetical seating plan, Kevin ended up right behind me in the middle row. At 10, my natural inclination was to be wary of new faces, so my guard was up with this unfamiliar kid sitting right behind me. I wasn't the largest kid in class. In fact, I was rather small for my age and only hit my growth spurt a few years later. Kevin, on the other hand, was slightly bigger than me, which only fueled my suspicion. Our initial interaction started on a sour note. Kevin tapped me on the back and asked if I could lend him a pencil. Who comes to school without a pencil on the first day? I started searching my desk for a spare, and just then, Miss Harris interrupted the class to call me out for not paying attention. "Well, give him a pencil and stop goofing off," she scolded. Getting chewed out on day 1 didn't exactly endear Kevin to me. However, as the days went by, our brief conversations, mostly within a group of the better students, began to change my impression of him. He might just turn out to be okay, I thought. Meanwhile, Billy Barron, known as Big Billy, was busy reasserting his dominance on the playground. He was the class bully and even took on some 5th graders whenever he could. A first-class jerk, he was secure in his physical superiority. On the 4th day of that first week, Billy decided it was my turn to be reminded of my place. With the teachers distracted, Billy cornered me on the playground. Just as Billy prepared to dish out his reminder, Kevin appeared out of nowhere, slamming into Billy and knocking him to the ground. Without giving Billy a moment to recover, Kevin pinned him down, delivering 4 solid punches to his face before jumping up and stepping back. We both braced ourselves for the worst, but to our astonishment, Billy started crying like a baby. The commotion attracted the teachers, and they arrived before anyone could escape. Kevin and I were given a week of detention, but nothing could dampen the smiles on our faces. Sitting outside the principal's office, I turned to Kevin and thanked him for his rescue. "What are friends for?" he replied simply. From that day forward, Kevin and I were inseparable. By Christmas, we had become best friends, and by summer, we were like brothers. I helped Kevin with his schoolwork, while he taught me how to defend myself. We complemented each other's weaknesses perfectly. Miss Harris turned out to be more perceptive than I initially thought. By Thanksgiving, she had identified Kevin's dyslexia. With the support of his parents and a skilled therapist, he began to excel academically, just as I began to stand up to the bullies. Here's something I never would have expected. By summer, even Billy had become friends with us. Billy, as it turned out, also suffered from dyslexia, worse than Kevin's, which had been the root of his aggression. Once he received the help he needed, he transformed into a new person. Beneath that veneer of anger and frustration was a genuinely decent guy. More than once, Billy came to our defense against older kids, and I started to believe that a significant portion of the world must be dyslexic. As we grew older and transitioned into high school, Billy, still known as Big Billy, joined the football team in the fall and played baseball in the spring. He quickly became a prominent figure in high school, but his good nature and warm heart remained unchanged. When we graduated, he enlisted in the military and was tragically killed in Iraq a year later. Billy was as loved and respected by his fellow soldiers as he had been by us. The day we laid William Barron to rest was the second saddest day of my life. The saddest day came 7 years later. Although Kevin and I attended different colleges, we stayed in touch, reuniting during holidays and summer breaks. Each time we met, it felt like no time had passed. We would pick up right where we left off, finishing old stories, chasing after girls, and generally having a good time while trying to stay out of trouble. In my junior year of college, I met Camila and fell hopelessly in love. She was warm, funny, bright, and mischievous, and she constantly kept me on my toes. She made me work hard to win her over, flirting and encouraging me in every way possible, but taking things slow. I decided I would wait forever if necessary. It didn't take that long. 6 months later, she was in my bed, and I thought she would stay there forever. When summer arrived, my parents were eager to meet Camila and form their own judgments about the woman who had stolen my heart. She spent 2 weeks with my family, and I did the same with hers. By the end of the summer, both sets of parents gave their approval. We each received gentle lectures about waiting until marriage, though everyone seemed aware that this advice might not be followed. Camilla got a quiet reminder from her mother to be cautious and avoid pregnancy before marriage. My father gave me a similar talk, adding, "If you have to, for God's sake, use a condom." I just nodded and smiled, knowing Camilla was already on the pill. During her visit that summer, Camilla met Kevin, and the two quickly developed a surprisingly close bond. I would leave them alone for a few minutes and return to find them laughing and sharing inside jokes. They'd share playful nudges and hugs, as if they'd known each other as long as Kevin and I had. I admit, my first pangs of jealousy surfaced, but I reminded myself that these were the two people closest to me in the world, and if I couldn't trust them, I couldn't trust anyone. As fall came and we returned to school for our senior year, Camilla would occasionally ask how Kevin was doing. I told myself it was normal, given that they had become friends, though I sometimes felt uneasy about the boundaries of their relationship. It wasn't excessive, and she never dwelled on him too much, but there were moments I felt unsure. I decided I needed to mature and set aside any insecurities, and for the most part, I did. When graduation day arrived, I proposed to Camilla, and she accepted. Everything seemed perfect. We both landed jobs in Hartford, Connecticut, found an apartment, and moved in together. Years earlier at my cousin's wedding, I had confidently told my parents, "I'm never going to do all this. I'll find a girl who wants a simple wedding, throw a party, and be done with it." My parents laughed, and my father wisely remarked, "When you find the right girl, you'll do what she wants, smile, and act like you enjoy it." My mother's knowing smile indicated he was right, and I took the lesson to heart. When the time came, I fully embraced the wedding planning process. I helped Camilla find a venue, hire a florist, choose a cake, select the menu, and address the invitations. I wore the tuxedo she approved of, practiced my vows, and followed her every directive. Snicker all you want, but you would do the same in my shoes, and you know it. Kevin flew into town to serve as my best man. The wedding proceeded flawlessly, and I settled into a blissful married life with Camilla. 6 months later, Kevin relocated to Hartford, and life seemed to improve each day. By then, I had completely moved past the jealousy I used to feel and trusted both Camilla and Kevin implicitly. Little did I know that my trust would later prove to be misplaced. We all had good jobs and were advancing in our careers. Kevin had an apartment on the opposite side of town, but Hartford is relatively small, so we met up regularly. It wasn't uncommon for me to come home and find Camilla and Kevin at the kitchen table, each with a beer, sharing a laugh over an inside joke. One Friday evening, I walked through the front door and Kevin greeted me with a playful jab. Look at him, dragging his sorry ass home like some old man. Camilla giggled. What's the matter, babe? Rough day. I tossed my case onto the sofa. Some days, it feels like all I do is fill out forms, write reports, and accomplish absolutely nothing of importance. Kevin straightened up. Not important. What kind of paper-pushing bureaucrat are you? Don't you know that paperwork is everything? If the papers are in order, then everything has to be right. Yeah, right. Everything was in order when NASA drove a spacecraft into Mars, I retorted, indulging in a bit of engineering humor. You have to admit, it made a big hole. Kevin laughed and Camilla smiled. By then, I'd found a beer and raised it in a toast. Never do anything in a small way. To paperwork. Kevin seconded, and we all took a drink. That night, we grilled some burgers, baked potatoes, and Camilla made a salad. Kevin crashed on our couch, and we all went out for breakfast the following morning. It was the beginning of what could be considered a typical weekend for us. Kevin mentioned he had a date on Saturday night along with a few errands to run, so we didn't see him for the rest of the weekend. That was fine by me, as it gave Camilla and me some private time together in our cozy apartment. Life was good, so good that I didn't notice the subtle changes in our routine. About a year and a half into our marriage, Camilla started working late more often and began dressing more sharply for work. It wasn't sudden or excessive, so when I finally noticed, I attributed it to her dedication as a motivated young professional. We were earning more money by then, and I understood her desire to dress better. However, even as our lives seemed to be on a positive trajectory, things slowly, but noticeably, changed. Kevin still visited regularly, often waiting for me when I got home on Friday evenings. Increasingly, though, those moments saw him waiting alone. The ball and chain working late again. Apparently. She's been doing that a lot lately. Yeah, she's taken on a lot more responsibility and has been putting in longer hours. Kevin nodded and mumbled, got to admire that, I suppose. I shrugged. Yeah, I suppose. We've been talking about starting a family soon, but she wants to climb a bit higher in the company first. She thinks it'll make it easier to return to work when she's ready. Yeah, I suppose that's true, Kevin said, turning away slightly. We grabbed a couple of beers and settled into the living room. An unusual quiet hung between us for a long while. Everything else good at home. Kevin tried to sound casual, but it came off strained. Yeah, she's often exhausted when she gets home, so I've been helping out more with chores like laundry and stuff. I hesitated, wondering if I should admit my concerns to my best friend. I'm starting to worry about her. She's usually too tired for, and I'm thinking maybe she needs an iron supplement or something. Kevin seemed lost in thought for a moment. Then, while looking at the ground, he quietly said, "Working late, always tired, not feeling up for, yeah, maybe she needs an iron supplement." I looked at him, my friend, my brother, and shook my head. She wouldn't. Not Camilla. She would never do that. You're right. That's just stupid. Not Camilla. We let the conversation lapse for a few minutes. Then, trying to lift the mood, I said, "I've got some steaks in the fridge." Whoa, big spender. What's the occasion? Livin' large, my friend, livin' large. It was false bravado, but we needed a change of subject. We both relaxed a bit, snacked, and had another beer. About an hour later, when Camila got home, we started grilling the steaks. From that point on, it was a typical happy Friday night, and I pushed our earlier conversation to the back of my mind. Life continued in this way for about 6 months until one evening when Camila approached me. "Richard, Mom's not doing so well. She's been complaining about feeling lonely, and since Dad passed, she hasn't really been living. You know what I mean?" "Yeah, babe, I do. Why don't we bring her down here to stay with us for a while?" Actually, I was thinking about going up there for a weekend. Maybe all she needs is some mother-daughter time. Let me provide some context. Both Kevin and I grew up in southern Rhode Island, near the Connecticut border, whereas Camila was raised outside Burlington, Vermont. She was a country girl at heart, and occasionally she needed to escape the bustle and traffic to find solace in an open field far from people. At least, that's how she used to be. So, I figured she needed a few days away. "When do you think you'll be going?" "I was thinking this weekend. I'll take off Friday, drive up, and come back Sunday evening. I'll make it up to you all week." "I could always come with you." "Babe, if you do, Mom will just spend the whole time fussing over you. You're like the son she never had," she said, smiling. "Aside from your brother, Edward, you mean?" Well, Edward has always been such a disappointment to her. She couldn't hold it together and started to giggle. "Okay, babe, you win. Go see your mom and have a good time." "I love you, old man," she said, a term of endearment she had recently started using, though I confess it didn't sit well with me. After that, she visited her mother about every 4 weeks, staying for a long weekend. She'd come back refreshed and happy. It seemed beneficial for both her and her mother, so I tried not to complain. That's what a husband does, right? He tries to keep the women in his life happy. At least, that's how I was taught. Camila made these monthly trips for about 8 months. She wasn't working late anymore, and she wasn't tired all the time. I figured her visits were good for everyone. Our intimate life improved too, so I wasn't complaining. When things are going well, you naturally think they'll continue that way, but change can come abruptly and without warning. One Wednesday night, I was driving home in heavy rain, distracted by my thoughts, when I ran a red light and got hit hard on the driver's side. I'd heard of people dying in such T-bone accidents, so once I gathered my wits and realized what had happened, I felt lucky. I had a broken leg, bruises down my left side, and a mild concussion, but I was alive. Later, I realized that if I'd been hit 6 feet further back at 45 miles per hour, just a tenth of a second later, I might have been dead. That's how the engineering mind works. The difference between life and death was a mere tenth of a second. The EMS arrived, loaded me onto a stretcher, and whisked me away to the hospital. There, they checked me out, patched me up, and put a cast on my leg. By morning, I was sent home. Camilla fussed over me for a week, and I can't say I minded one bit. Kevin started coming over every evening to check on me and see if I needed anything. Soon enough, they both decided I was well enough to manage on my own, and life returned to its usual rhythm. I went back to work by the middle of the following week. Camilla or Kevin would drive me to and from the office, while my colleagues lavished even more attention on me. Crutches have that effect. I admit I milked the situation for all it was worth. The pain subsided, making the cast and crutches merely inconvenient. I could navigate stairs, cross the parking lot, and even walk a block or two, but it was quite an effort, so I mostly stuck to eating lunch in the office. I got around, but I wasn't swift. Soon enough, Camila stopped fussing over me, and I started counting down the days until the cast came off. About 4 weeks after the accident, she sat next to me and said, "Richard, it's been a while since I visited my mother. Would you mind if I drove up there this weekend? I'll make it a short trip, leave Saturday morning, and be back Sunday night." I confess I wasn't thrilled, but I was managing well enough. Still not driving, I called Kevin to see if he'd be around if I needed anything. Would he be available? He showed up Friday night with a bag full of groceries, mostly steaks, beer, and some nachos, and made himself at home in the guest room for the weekend. No complaints from me. We cracked open a couple of beers while Camila packed for her trip. "Camila's heading to her mom's again this weekend," Kevin asked. "Yeah, it's been a while. I'm doing pretty well, and her mother needs her." "I'm sure." I glanced at Kevin, but said nothing. The next morning, Camila kissed me goodbye, and in high spirits, she walked out the door and headed to Vermont. Kevin seemed to linger, staring at the doorway long after she left. Finally, I asked, "What's bugging you?" "Me? Nothing. You know me. I'm Mr. Get Along. No worries, nothing to see here." "Let's go to breakfast, Mr. Get Along. I'm starving." If you've never experienced having your leg in a cast, navigating into a car can be a bit of a challenge. You have two options: sit sideways in the back seat or master the slip and slide technique in the front. Here's how the slip and slide works. First, push the seat all the way back and recline the seat back fully. Lay a plastic trash bag on the seat, sit on the bag, and slide yourself onto the seat back. Once you're far enough back, you can swing your leg into the car. Then slide forward into your proper seating position and adjust the seat back upright. To get out, you just reverse the process. Getting to breakfast was quite the task, so I made sure to make it count by ordering up a storm. I had eggs Benedict, home fries, coffee, orange juice, and several slices of bacon. I even considered a grilled blueberry muffin, but felt too self-conscious to ask when the waitress returned. Since it was a Saturday, my immobilized leg gave me a perfect excuse to skip any chores. Kevin and I decided to make the most of the day. Our first stop was an outdoor store where we admired high-end fly rods and bought a few flies, dreaming big but staying frugal. Next, we headed to the shooting range and leased a couple of guns for an hour. Neither of us owns a firearm or has a strong desire to, but occasionally we feel the urge to fire off a few rounds and assert some dominance over the targets. Let's just say the targets were safe that day. For lunch, we indulged in some barbecue and then roamed around the hardware store for new gadgets. We even browsed the electronics store just for kicks before finally heading back home by early evening. After such an eventful day, it was time to relax on the porch with a few beers, some good conversation, and a giant plate of nachos. Kevin, who had been holding back his thoughts for months, began to loosen up that evening. "How's Camila's mother doing these days?" he asked. "About the same as always," I replied. "She seems cheerful enough when I talk to her, but Camila mentions she's been feeling down ever since her husband passed away." "Doesn't she have a son? I think I met him once. Edward, right?" "Yeah, Edward. He's a solid guy. I don't see him as often as I'd like, but I think you'd get along with him. No nonsense, great sense of humor. He married a local girl and lives about an hour away from Grace. Grace is Camila's mother, right? Yeah. You two get along. Absolutely. She's like a second mom to me. Her husband passed away about a year after Camila and I got married, but both of them embraced me as if I'd always been part of their family. It's funny, I can't recall a single time the TV was on when I visited. Edward Sr., Camila's dad, had his favorite chair set up just for watching TV, but he never watched it when I was around. We'd sit, chat, tell jokes, and enjoy each other's company while that TV stayed off the entire time. Now that's good, people. I nodded and smiled. I miss him. The first 6 months after he died were tough on Camila. She wasn't herself, but then her spirits lifted. She started dressing up more and sharing stories about her colleagues. Around that same time, she began going out on some Fridays with her coworkers. Kevin gazed quietly across the lawn behind the apartment. Do you see Grace much these days? That question struck a chord, stirring something that had been bothering me. Actually, apart from Christmas, I haven't seen her in almost a year. Camila visits her once a month, and I talk to her on the phone occasionally, but something's changed. She seems on edge around me. Last Christmas, we visited for a few days, and she seemed happy to see me, but whenever we were alone, she finds something else to do. When I offered to help with the dishes, she thanked me, handed me the towel, and walked away. I tried to assist her with dinner, but she didn't want any help. Honestly, I started thinking she was upset with me, but then she'd smile warmly from across the room when we were all together, and it felt like everything was fine. I've thought about asking her, but I'm afraid of hurting her feelings. Maybe she's not mad at you. Maybe she feels guilty. Why would she feel guilty? She's a wonderful woman who wouldn't hurt a fly. I don't know. Maybe she feels torn. Like she isn't being the mother-in-law to you that she wants to be. As I pondered that thought, the phone rang. It was Camila. Richard, what have you two been up to today? It was the usual check-in call. I told her about our day out, and she shared her day with her mom. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes and ended with "I love you." It wasn't the stuff of romance movies, but it was typical married life. Camila says hello. Hello, Camila. Kevin shouted into the empty space as I had already hung up. What's Camila's cell phone number? I recited it from memory. Why do you ask? I've got this nifty app on my phone. It can locate any cell phone using its number. Why on earth would you have something like that? Some of the guys at work were filing false reports, claiming they visited vendors when they didn't. Instead of calling every vendor and challenging every report, which would make the company look bad, I started pinging their phones. We identified the problems and resolved them with minimal fuss, so we didn't need to repair our relationships with the vendors. Interesting. You management folks really do have some serious issues to tackle. That was about as much ribbing as we ever exchanged. Didn't you tell me your mother-in-law lives in Vermont? Yeah, she's just outside Burlington. Why? Well, according to this, Camila's phone is in Maine, specifically in Portland. That has to be a mistake. They're about 200 miles apart. Your cell phone is? Yeah. According to this, you're sitting right in front of me. Let me see that. I peered at the screen, and sure enough, it showed I was within a few hundred yards of my house. Then I entered Camila's number, and it still indicated she was in Maine. I checked the numbers of my brother, sister, parents, and boss. Each was where they should be. I rechecked Camila's number, and it still pointed to Maine. I wasn't misremembering. Her number was correct in my contacts. What the hell is going on? Richard, do you ever call your mother-in-law while Camila is with her? No. Usually, Camila calls me. Is there anything you forgot to tell Camila when she called? I saw where this was heading. I didn't tell her you said hello. I'd love to say hello to her. I called Grace's phone, and she answered on the third ring. Hello. How's my favorite mother-in-law? I anticipated her usual upbeat response, but there was an unusually long silence. Grace, are you there? Yes, of course, Richard. How are you, dear? I'm fine. I was just thinking it's been a while since we spoke, and I wanted to check in on you." "Oh, I'm doing well, dear. You know me, low maintenance as always. How are you? How's work? How are you managing with that cast? When does it come off?" She sounded uncharacteristically flustered. Grace is normally very calm and composed. We chatted for a few minutes, and she started to sound more like herself. Then I dropped the bombshell. "Listen, Grace, I hate to bother you, but I've been missing my wife and need to tell her something important. Can you put her on the phone for me?" The silence on the other end was palpable. "Grace, are you still there?" "Yes, dear. I'm sorry. Camilla stepped out to get some eggs for tomorrow's breakfast. She should be back soon." Her voice quivered, revealing the tension. Grace was not adept at lying, and it was clear she was fabricating this story. "Well, please ask her to call me when she gets back. No matter the time, I'll be here." "Of course, dear. I'm sure she'll call you soon." With that, we exchanged goodbyes, and I hung up. I turned to Kevin. "She lied to me." "Does she do that often?" "She's never lied to me." I didn't even think she was capable of lying. This is completely out of character. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Camila. "Hello, love. Sorry I missed your call." "That's okay. I just missed you and wanted to hear your voice." "Ah, that's sweet. I miss you too." Also, Kevin insists on taking us to dinner next weekend. How does that sound? "Sounds like we need to pick someplace expensive." She laughed. It baffled me how she could laugh while lying to my face. "Listen, babe, I hate to bother her again, but I needed to tell your mother something. Can you put her on for me?" Silence. Then, "Oh, Richard, she's gone to bed. Tell me what it is, and I'll pass it along to her. It's been just 10 minutes since I called her. I'm sure she's still awake. Please just take the phone to her. It won't take long." Camila made her next big mistake by getting irritated with me. "Richard, I told you she's gone to bed, and I'm not going to disturb her. Just give me the message, and I'll pass it along in the morning." I responded with silence. "Richard, are you still there? I don't appreciate your tone, and I sure don't deserve it. I'll tell her the next time I see her. Good night, Camila." "Sweetie, I'm sorry. I didn't mean." I hung up on her. It wasn't a conscious decision. I was just genuinely angry. My suspicions seemed confirmed, and her attitude was only adding to my frustration. "Where does your app place her cell now?" "Same place. It hasn't moved." Everything clicked into place. My wife was lying to me, and her mother was covering for her. I racked my brain, but the only reason that made sense for Camila to lie was betrayal, and Grace had no excuse either. The next few hours in my apartment were a blur of tension. I wanted a drink to calm my nerves, but Kevin stopped me. "You need a clear head now, and beer won't give you that," he said. Instead, he started brewing coffee. It wasn't until later that I realized he had a plan all along. Armed with 2 full travel mugs, he strode into the living room and declared, "Buckle up, Richard. The charger's ready to roll." "What are you talking about?" "Listen, Richard," he began, "right now, you're seething with anger and consumed by doubt. Your heart doesn't want to accept what your head is screaming. You need answers, and the only way to get them is to confront her. We're driving to Portland. Are you coming or not?" Looking back, I realized I was in shock. I sat there, torn and bewildered, until a wave of anger and determination surged through me. "I'm going," I declared. With my broken leg and crutches, I wasn't quick, but I was moving. The devastated man who had just listened to his wife and mother-in-law lie to him, the man who feared his wife was unfaithful, transformed into someone ready to confront his cheating spouse and demand a divorce. The night was the perfect backdrop for our journey, and the miles slipped by with little distraction. Kevin drove while I stewed. Camila was cheating on me. For a year, she claimed she was visiting her mother in Vermont. Had she been unfaithful the whole time? Who was this other man, and where did she meet him? Did she even go to Vermont on those weekends? I tried to sift through my emotions and separate fact from suspicion. She said she was visiting her mother in Vermont, but she was in Maine. She lied to me. Her mother lied to me. They were conspiring together. No matter their efforts to convince me otherwise, she wasn't at her mother's house. Everything The nights out with the girls, the sharp work outfits, the subtle shifts in her behavior started to make sense. The 3.5-hour drive from Hartford to Portland was mostly silent. We left a bit after midnight, stopping once at a 24-hour convenience store for more coffee and snacks. With hardly any traffic, the journey was smooth. As we neared Portland, I pulled up the app on Kevin's phone to track Camila's location. Portland, known for its navigability, quickly revealed her car's whereabouts. By 4:30, we found it parked in the lot beneath a 3-story apartment building. Kevin nodded, said, "All right," and drove back onto the street. "Where the hell are you going?" I demanded. "Do you want to ring all the doorbells searching for her or wait for her to come out?" Kevin responded calmly. "Well, I don't know, Tam. I've never done this before." My frustration was palpable. "And you'll never have to do it again," Kevin assured me. "We're going to make a quick pit stop, unload, reload, get gas, and then we'll be ready to stake out her car." He was thinking ahead, while I was an emotional wreck. "All right, I get it now," I conceded. 20 minutes later, we returned and parked in a secluded space with a clear view of Camila's car. Kevin shut off the charger, and we began our vigil. It was 5 a.m. on a quiet Sunday morning. Upstairs, my cheating wife was likely having a laugh with her lover about how easily they deceived me. All I could do was sit and wait. 5 excruciating hours passed. The sun rose and the air warmed, but we stayed put. Finally, around 10 a.m., Camila emerged from the building, arm in arm with her weekend companion. I recognized him instantly from a few of her office events. "Isn't that her?" Kevin asked. "Of course it's her. Pull up behind them and block them in so she can see me," I instructed. Kevin started the charger, maneuvered around a row of cars, and stopped behind what I assumed was her lover's vehicle. He turned off the engine. The guy gave me a defiant look, but before he could say anything, Camila spotted me. Her eyes went wide, she dropped her purse, and fainted, hitting her head hard on the pavement. I didn't move to help her. I looked at her lover and said, "Help her, asshole. She's yours now. Tell her never to come home. Ever." I signaled Kevin to leave. He started the charger's engine, and we drove off into traffic. My wife, my life, lay unconscious on the pavement behind me. I had just left her there with her new man. If he wanted the pleasure, he could handle the responsibilities too. She was no longer my concern. I had cared for her when she was sick, supported her through her father's death, reassured her during work troubles, and entertained her with dancing and dinners. I had paid the bills, built savings, worked late, and helped with household chores. All the things you do when you share a life with someone. Now, none of that was my duty anymore. That was all his problem now. Kevin drove a few miles and pulled into a parking lot. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied, resolving my thoughts. "All decisions made, all doubts resolved. I know what I'm going to do now." "Divorce?" he inquired. "Dan right. I promised for better or worse, but if I'm the only one committed, then it isn't a marriage. I won't be lied to, and I won't be cuckolded." Kevin nodded, understanding my resolve. He fired up the charger again, and we headed south on I-95. "Where are we going now?" It was a fair question. I knew where I wanted to go, but it felt like a big ask. "How do you feel about a day of driving?" I asked. Kevin just smiled. "Vermont?" "Yeah, Vermont." "All right, south on I-95, west on NH-4, then we're at minus 202 to Concord, south on I-93, west on I-89, and don't stop until you hit Burlington." "How the hell do you know that?" I asked, a bit astonished. I looked it up while we were staking out her car. "I didn't see that." "You were asleep." "Shit, seriously." "Relax. You were exhausted. Stress does that." "Sorry, man." "Nothing to be sorry about. You're wrestling with every emotion in the book, and I'm just a guy out for a drive." But I knew he was more than that. Kevin, my brother, was a man of deep empathy. He cared about me and about every decent human being he ever met. As we drove south on I-95 and then headed west on NH-4, I started piecing things together. I replayed every conversation, every action, searching for clues that something was amiss. There were little things, but people are complicated, and at the time, I wrote them off as the normal ebb and flow of married life. I figured it was just my wife dealing with career pressures and building a future for us. Marriage isn't a perpetual honeymoon, but there were signs, and somehow, Kevin saw them when I missed them. You knew. How did you know? I demanded, bewildered. I didn't know for sure, he admitted. I just started wondering. What clued you in? I don't know. It was the little things. It wasn't just the late nights at the office, the Friday nights out with the girls, or the trips north to visit her mother. It was all of it together, and then how she seemed to stop making those little gestures that got me wondering. What little gestures? The way she used to touch your hand or arm whenever you were near, the little kisses, the smiles, and the need to hold your attention when others were talking. All those little things dried up just a year and a half after the wedding. Dude, I was jealous of you in a big way. I kept wondering, why can't I find a girl like Camila? I used to love being around the two of you and thinking, someday, this is what it'll be like for me. Then it wasn't. How did you see it when I didn't? Oh, you saw it, Richard. We talked about it often enough. You just didn't want to believe it. You loved your wife, and the thought that she wasn't as committed to the marriage as you were was something you couldn't accept. I was a blind fool. No, you were just a man in love. Some women search for love all their lives and never find it, while Camila had it and threw it away. As much as you're hurting now, believe me, she's going to regret her actions more than you can imagine. You were a good husband. I know it sounds cliched, but you came home every night, didn't waste your paycheck at the bar, and you didn't cheat. You took care of your wife, saved for the future, listened to her, and held her when she cried. That may not seem like much, but in the long run, it's everything. So, where did I go wrong? You didn't. She did. Why? I don't know. Maybe it was her father's death. Maybe the pressures of marriage and a career were too much for her. Maybe the thought of starting a family someday scared her. Or perhaps she just met a smooth-talking predator who got in her head and twisted her thinking. You may never know. Hell, she might not even know. We drove in silence for a long time after that. The trip from Portland to Burlington takes about 4.5 hours, and on any other day, I would have appreciated the scenery. But today, it was just miles and hours passing by as I prepared to confront the woman I once saw as a motherly figure and partner. I demand answers, why she had betrayed me, what I had done to deserve her lies and deception. She owed me that much. As we drove, the thought occurred to me. This woman had answers to many of my questions, but would she tell me? About 45 minutes south of Portland, nearing the New Hampshire border, I blurted out, I should have kicked his ass. Kevin kept his eyes on the road, but started laughing. Sure, I can see it now. You throw open the car door, push the seat back down, wiggle backward to swing your bum leg out, then wiggle forward until you're positioned, lean out the door, put both arms on the door frame, lift yourself out of the car, grab your crutches, hobble over to the guy, get in his face, and say, I'm going to kick your ass. Okay, he had a point. I still should have kicked his ass. You will, later, after your leg heals and you regain your strength. We'll drive back up, find him, and maybe bring a couple of friends. There's no point in being gentleman about it. He wasn't a gentleman when he slept with your wife behind your back. We'll find him, beat the crap out of him, and drive home. Roger that. We continued riding quietly, each lost in our own thoughts, me contemplating the impending confrontation and Kevin focused on the road ahead. As we approached the Connecticut River, the natural boundary between New Hampshire and Vermont, Kevin broke the silence. You hungry? No. Well, I am. He took the exit ramp off the highway, and soon we found ourselves at a family-style pub. We ordered 2 big cheeseburgers, but when I asked for a beer, Kevin intervened. He'll have an iced tea, he told the waitress. I shot him a bewildered look. Don't you think I've earned a beer? You'll need your wits when we get there, he replied firmly. Turning back to the waitress, he reiterated, 2 iced teas, please. I shrugged at the waitress, reluctantly conceding. Over lunch, we discussed the questions I had for Grace. I needed to know the why and how long of it all. I believed she was likely privy to at least some of the answers. Above all, I wanted to understand how she could lie to me for so long. Grace was more than just my mother-in-law. She was like a second mother. When your spouse betrays you, it's heartbreaking, but it's within the realm of possibility. Marriage vows promise fidelity, but don't guarantee it. Mothers, on the other hand, are supposed to be inviolable beacons of loyalty and support. Then Kevin dropped a bombshell. Maybe that's what happened. What do you mean? Maybe she felt compelled to stand by Camila, even though she was ashamed of what her daughter was doing. It suddenly hit me. Grace would never choose me over her own daughter. This realization didn't lessen the pain, but it did set my expectations for the confrontation ahead. It was dawning on me that I had lost both a wife and a mother figure in the same day. At 4 in the afternoon, we arrived at Grace's house. No one came to the door as we pulled up. Perhaps Camila hadn't called ahead, and Grace wasn't expecting us. "Should I stay here? Maybe you should talk with her alone," Kevin suggested. "You've been with me through all of it. You're up to your neck in this now, so you might as well walk the last mile with me." Kevin helped me out of the car, and together we walked to the door and rang the bell. It wasn't Grace who answered. It was her son, Edward Jr. He stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "Richard, am I ever glad to see you. Your wife called Mom a couple of hours ago, and she's been crying ever since. She's a basket case, Richard. I haven't seen her like this since Dad died, and even then, she held it together better than she is now." "Yeah, well, Camila was caught, and your mother is involved." "Caught? What are you talking about?" "Camila's been cheating on me, and your mom has been covering for her." Edward's back straightened as he looked me squarely in the eye. "That's bullshit." "It's the truth. Your mom lied to me last night, claiming Camila was here all weekend. Did you see her?" "I only came over to take Mom out to brunch, but Camila wasn't here when I arrived." "That's because she spent the weekend in Portland with a guy she used to work with in Connecticut. Both Camila and your mother lied to me repeatedly. I'm here for answers." Edward glanced towards the door. "She's in bad shape, Richard. I don't think." "I won't be harsh, but she owes me an explanation." Edward hesitated, repeating himself. "All right, but she's in bad shape right now, Richard. Go easy on her." "I'll try." As I moved towards the door, Kevin interjected, "I think I'll wait out here. This is a family issue now." Reluctantly, I agreed. Entering the house, a flood of memories hit me. This was a place where I had once felt at home, but I knew that after today, I would never walk through these doors again. Camila and I were done, Grace and I were done, and Edward would not take kindly to what I was about to tell his mother. In just one day, I had lost half my family, and my life had irrevocably changed. I stepped through the door and heard Grace sobbing. When she saw me, she wailed loudly, the agony and guilt of her betrayal evident. I approached her as she buried her face in her hands. Standing before her, I saw the depth of her pain, and all the questions I had melted away in the face of her tacit admission of guilt. I no longer cared about the answers. I couldn't hurt her more than she was already hurting. Taking a deep breath, I exhaled. "Goodbye, Grace," I said simply. Turning around, I left the house, her screams of anguish echoing behind me. It was clear I had been more of a son to her than I realized. I had lost my second mother, but she had lost her second son, and now we both keenly felt each other's pain. "Outside," Kevin remarked. That was fast. I just nodded. "Let's go," I said. Within minutes, we were back on the road, heading south towards Connecticut. We rode in silence, and as the fog in my mind began to lift, I reflected on where I might be without my brother, Kevin. I thought back to those early days in 4th grade, through grade school, high school, and our reconnection after college. Where would I be today if Kevin hadn't transferred into my school that year and sat behind me in class? Who would I be without a brother to share the journey with? Who else would have my back through it all? As we cruised back towards Burlington, I glanced over at Kevin. "Thanks, man. I don't know where I'd be without you." Without taking his eyes off the road, he replied, "What's a brother for?" After a short pause, he added, "You know, this isn't over by a long shot." I know. It may not be over, but the marriage is. We fell into silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I knew I'd need to find a lawyer. There would be accusations, denials, and tears. We were DIN case, dual income, no kids, and young. We didn't have much in terms of property or investments. We rented rather than owned, so the division of property would be straightforward. About an hour later, Kevin broke the quiet. What are you thinking about? Whether I'll need to see her again, who gets what, the usual stuff. So, who gets custody of me? I turned to see Kevin, still focused on the road, grinning like the Cheshire Cat. Me, I guess. She's going to suffer enough. Anyone passing us on the highway, seeing us laughing like two fools, would think we were just old friends out for a Sunday drive, cracking jokes and slinging insults. Kevin once told me he was my friend, but he was far more than that. I couldn't imagine where I'd be without my brother. Unsurprisingly, the marriage didn't end easily or quietly. Camilla wasn't home when we got back. In fact, she took the next week off and spent that time with her mother. I received the inevitable phone calls and text messages, all of which I read and learned nothing from. She returned, asking for forgiveness, but I had none left to give. Her betrayal was not a one-time drunken mistake. It was a calculated and prolonged deception that started while she was working in Hartford. She had her excuses, but I refused to accept any of them. She even tried the old line, "I didn't take anything away from you." Bullshit. She eventually moved out. The judge ordered counseling, which I attended, but it did nothing to change my mind. 9 months after discovering her affair, the divorce was final, and she relocated to Portland. Doubling down on a bad decision, she married the guy. Her second marriage lasted less than 2 years. He was an unrepentant cheat, and she was the only one who didn't see it coming. Kevin and I never took that drive up north for closure. By the time my leg healed and I regained my strength, the scum no longer seemed worth the effort or risk. I wasn't about to do time for that worthless excuse for a human being. Grace still calls from time to time, and I strive to be civil with her. Each conversation begins with her apology, to which I've grown accustomed to replying, "I understand, Grace." Maybe one day I can honestly say I forgive her, but that day hasn't arrived yet. The love I once felt for my second mother has faded, but I've come to appreciate the difficult position Camilla put her in. Grace's lies were meant to save my marriage, hoping Camilla would come to her senses, but it was a deceit destined to fail. Grace did me one small favor, though I suspect it was more for her own peace of mind. She never allowed that scumbag into her home and refused to let him stay there, even after their marriage. She always treated him like the interloper he was, not wanting anything to do with him. It may have been too little, too late, but I know it took a lot for her to take that stand. It made her daughter a virtual exile within her own family, possibly contributing to the collapse of her second marriage. As for me, life goes on. Nearly 2 years have passed since that fateful day, and I'm starting to consider dipping my toe back into the dating pool. It may seem like a long time to some, but change comes slowly and with great effort to me. Trust, even more so. Kevin still drops by regularly, but now I can visit his place just as easily. He's dating a lovely girl with an infectious laugh. She knows my story and has made it clear what she thinks of cheats. It's funny how the tables have turned. Now I find myself envying my friend, thinking, someday that could be me. They say divorce is like a death in the family. They're wrong. Divorce is like half the family dies, and the other half limps along as best it can. Some might say Richard never got the revenge he deserved, but liars and cheats create their own suffering. The fist seldom inflicts the lasting pain that the heart and mind endure. The heart knows pain because the love that was freely given is withdrawn, and the brain knows they have only themselves to blame. As for the kind of men who seduce other men's wives, I can only say karma has a way of catching up. They suffer every day in countless ways they'll never understand, denied the greatest experiences life has to offer until one day they cross the wrong man with less to lose. Let Richard and Kevin move on with their lives, free from the need to dwell on actions that may feel satisfying in the moment, but never provide lasting fulfillment. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, Please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.